The rain hit Cedar Falls like it had a personal grudge against the little town. Elena Rodriguez wiped down the same counter for the third time, watching the water pour down the windows of her diner like tears. It was almost 9 in the evening, and she should have closed an hour ago, but somehow she couldn't bring herself to flip that sign and head upstairs to her lonely apartment. Thunder rolled across the sky just as the bell above her door chimed. Elena looked up to see a man step inside, and her first thought was that he looked like he'd been wrestling with the storm and lost. Water dripped from his worn brown cowboy hat onto her freshly mopped floor. His jeans were soaked through, clinging to long legs, and his boots left muddy prints with each step. "Sorry about the mess," he said, pulling off his hat and running a hand through dark hair that was plastered to his head. "I saw your lights were still on." Elena grabbed a handful of paper towels from behind the counter. "Don't worry about it. That's what mops are for." She handed him the towels and really looked at him for the first time. He had the kind of face that told stories, weathered skin that spoke of long days in the sun, laugh lines around green eyes, and a jaw that looked like it could take a punch and keep smiling. "Much obliged," he said, dabbing at his face. His voice carried a slight drawl that wasn't quite local. "I don't suppose you're still serving. I've been driving for hours, and I'm pretty sure my truck's about ready to give up the ghost." Elena glanced at the clock. She should say no. She should tell him the kitchen was closed and point him toward the 24-hour gas station down the highway. Instead, she found herself saying, "What were you thinking?" "Nothing too fancy. I sent my cook home an hour ago. Just coffee would be fine. Maybe a sandwich if you've got bread that's not too stale." She poured him a cup of coffee in her biggest mug and set it down at the counter. "Turkey and cheese, okay? I've got some leftover roast beef too." "Turkey sounds perfect." He wrapped his hands around the mug like it was precious cargo. "I'm Cole, by the way." "Elena, this is my place." She gestured around the small diner with its red vinyl booths and checkered floor. It wasn't much, but it was hers. While she made his sandwich, Elena found herself stealing glances at this stranger. He sat quietly, staring out at the storm, and there was something almost peaceful about the way he occupied space. No fidgeting with his phone, no demanding attention, just a man who seemed comfortable with silence. "You from around here?" she asked, sliding the plate across the counter. Cole shook his head. "Just passing through. Or trying to, anyway. My truck's making some interesting noises, and I'm not sure she'll make it much further tonight." Elena had lived in Cedar Falls her whole life, and she knew the type. Drifters came through regularly. Men looking for work, running from something, or just searching for whatever was over the next hill. Most of them had a restless energy, always ready to bolt. But Cole seemed different. There was something solid about him, even soaked and tired as he was. "Nearest mechanic won't be open till morning," she said. "Roy's good with trucks, but he's probably asleep by now. There's a motel about 10 miles down the road if you need a place to stay." Cole took a bite of his sandwich and nodded appreciatively. "This is really good. Thank you." He paused, then added quietly, "I don't suppose you need any help around here. I'm handy with repairs, and I work cheap." Elena's eyebrows went up. "What kind of repairs?" "Pretty much anything. Plumbing, electrical, carpentry. I've been fixing things since I was knee-high to a grasshopper." He gestured toward the corner where she'd been fighting with a temperamental freezer for weeks. "That unit giving you trouble?" "How did you know?" "The way it's humming. Sounds like the compressor's working too hard. Probably needs cleaning or a coolant top-off." Elena studied his face, looking for signs that he was running some kind of con. She'd been burned before by smooth-talking strangers who promised the world and delivered nothing but headaches. But Cole's green eyes were steady and honest, and there was something about the way he'd said work cheap that tugged at her heart. "I can't pay much," she said finally. "Business has been slow lately. Food and coffee would be payment enough, if you've got projects that need doing." The rain continued to pound against the windows, and Elena made a decision that surprised her. "There's a small room above the storage area out back. Used to be where the owner lived before he built the house next door. It's not much, just a bed, a table, and a hot plate, but it's dry." Cole's face lit up with the first real smile she'd seen from him. "That's very kind of you. I promise I won't be any trouble. I hope not, because I've got a shotgun upstairs and I know how to use it." That earned her a laugh, rich and warm. "Yes, ma'am. I'll be on my best behavior." Elena poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. Something about this stranger made her want to keep talking, to push back the loneliness that had been her constant companion since her father died 6 months ago. "So what brings you to Cedar Falls?" Besides truck trouble, Cole was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee like it might have answers. Just needed to get away from some things for a while. Figure out what comes next. Running from something or running to something? Bit of both, I suppose. He looked up at her and she saw a sadness there that made her chest tighten. Sometimes a man needs to remember who he is when nobody's watching. Elena understood that feeling better than she cared to admit. After her father's funeral, half the town had watched her struggle to keep the diner running, waiting to see if she'd fail. The weight of their expectations and their doubt had been crushing. "Well," she said, "nobody watches much in Cedar Falls except Mrs. Henderson, and she's mostly just making sure people aren't parking in front of her house." That got another smile from Cole. "Sounds like my kind of town." The storm was finally starting to ease up, the thunder growing more distant. Elena glanced at the clock again and realized they'd been talking for over an hour. She couldn't remember the last time conversation had felt this easy. "I should let you get settled," she said, reaching under the counter for the spare key to the back room. "Fair warning, the bed's not much and the hot plate is older than dirt, but it works." Cole stood and pulled out a worn wallet. "What do I owe you for the food?" "Consider it a welcome gift. You can start earning your keep tomorrow if you're still interested." He nodded and headed toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "Elena, thank you. It's been a long time since anyone showed me kindness without wanting something in return." After he left, Elena stood alone in her diner, listening to the rain slow to a gentle patter. She told herself she was just being neighborly, helping out someone in need. But as she locked up and headed upstairs, she couldn't shake the feeling that Cole's arrival might change more than just her broken freezer. Outside, lightning flickered one last time across the sky, illuminating the old pickup truck parked beside her diner. Elena fell asleep that night wondering about the stories that truck could tell, and about the man who drove it into her quiet life on a stormy Thursday evening. 3 weeks later, Elena couldn't imagine her diner without Cole. What had started as a simple arrangement, food and shelter in exchange for odd jobs, had turned into something she hadn't expected. The man had magic in his hands when it came to fixing things. That stubborn freezer that had been driving her crazy for months, Cole had it purring like a kitten within 2 days. He'd taken the whole thing apart on her back patio, laying out parts with the precision of a surgeon, then put it back together better than new. When she'd asked where he learned to do that, he'd just shrugged and said his grandfather had taught him that everything deserved a second chance. The morning rush was just ending when old Pete Kowalski shuffled in, his face twisted with frustration. "Elena, honey, you know anyone who can fix a busted water heater? Mine died last night and the repair company can't come out for a week." Before Elena could answer, Cole looked up from where he was painting the window trim. "What kind of unit is it, Mr. Kowalski?" Pete squinted at him suspiciously. "Electric. About 15 years old. Why, you know something about water heaters?" "A bit. Mind if I take a look?" An hour later, Cole had Pete's water heater running perfectly. Word spread fast in a town like Cedar Falls, and soon Elena's diner became an unofficial repair shop during Cole's breaks. He fixed Mrs. Chen's washing machine, got the Hendersons' old truck running again, and even helped the fire chief repair a pump that had been giving the department trouble for months. "Where on earth did you learn all this?" Elena asked one afternoon as she watched Cole rewire the temperamental jukebox that hadn't played a song in 2 years. Cole's hands stilled for just a moment. "Here and there. I spent a lot of time around machinery growing up. Had good teachers." His voice carried that same distant note it always did when she asked about his past. Elena had learned not to push. Cole was like a stray cat in some ways. The more you chased, the faster he'd run. But in quiet moments, he'd share little pieces of himself. How he'd learned to cook from his grandmother, the way his face lit up when he talked about horses, the careful way he handled the old photographs that customers sometimes shared, like he understood the weight of memories. The lunch crowd was thinning out when Reverend Thompson stopped by with news that made Elena's heart sink. "The church roof's getting worse," he said, accepting a cup of coffee with grateful hands. "We've got buckets in 3 pews now, and I'm afraid this next storm might be the end of it. Insurance won't cover repairs, they say it's wear and tear." Elena knew what that meant. The little white church had been the heart of Cedar Falls for over a century, but the congregation was aging and the budget was tight. Without that roof, they'd lose their gathering place, maybe forever. "How much would it cost to fix?" Cole asked quietly. Reverend Thompson sighed. "More than we have." The estimates are all over $10,000, and that's just for materials. Labor would double it. Cole nodded thoughtfully but didn't say anything more. Elena noticed him step outside to make a phone call, his voice too low to hear through the windows. When he came back, he had that look she was starting to recognize, the one that meant he was planning something. The next morning, a truck full of roofing materials appeared at the church. Cole was there before sunrise, and by the time Elena opened the diner, he was already hard at work with a crew of men she didn't recognize. When she asked about it, he just said some friends owed him favors. "Cole fixed our roof for free," Reverend Thompson announced to anyone who would listen. "Wouldn't take a penny. Said the church was too important to lose. That was Cole all over. He never made a big deal about helping people, never wanted credit or thanks. He just saw what needed doing and did it." Elena found herself watching him more closely, trying to figure out what made him tick. During the slow afternoon hours, when the diner was empty except for the two of them, their conversations grew deeper. Cole was a good listener, the kind who heard not just your words but the feelings behind them. When Elena talked about her dreams of expanding the diner, maybe adding rooms upstairs for travelers, his eyes never glazed over with polite disinterest the way most people's did. "You could do it," he said one day, looking around the small space with an appraising eye. "This place has good bones. The location's perfect too. Right on the main road, but still feels like home." "It's just a pipe dream," Elena said, wiping down tables that were already clean. "Something like that would cost a fortune, and banks don't exactly line up to lend money to small-town diners." "Dreams aren't silly if they make you happy," Cole said simply. "And this place already feels like home to everyone who walks in. That's worth more than most people realize." There was something in his voice when he said that, a longing that made Elena wonder what kind of home he'd left behind. She'd noticed he never talked about family, never mentioned friends or a hometown. His phone, an old flip phone that looked like it belonged in a museum, rarely rang. And when it did, he'd step outside to answer with the careful privacy of a man with secrets. One evening, as they were closing up, Elena finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering her for weeks. "Cole, are you running from trouble? Because if you are, I need to know." He looked up from sweeping the floor, his green eyes serious. "Not the kind of trouble you're thinking. No law after me, no angry husbands or gambling debts." He leaned on the broom handle and seemed to choose his words carefully. "I made some mistakes, Elena. Hurt people I cared about by caring about the wrong things. Sometimes a man needs to step away from his life to remember who he's supposed to be." "And have you? Remembered, I mean?" Cole's smile was soft and a little sad. "Getting there. This place, these people, it's helping me remember what matters." Elena felt her cheeks warm at being included in that list. Over the past few weeks, she'd found herself looking forward to their morning conversations over coffee. The way he'd sneak her bites of whatever he was fixing for lunch, the sound of his laughter when she told stories about the diner's more colorful customers. "What happens when you figure it all out?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "Do you disappear back to wherever you came from?" Cole was quiet for so long that Elena wondered if she'd overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know. For the first time in years, I don't know what comes next. And that's both terrifying and wonderful." Later that night, Elena lay in bed listening to the sounds of Cole moving around in his small room behind the diner. She'd grown used to those sounds, the creak of floorboards, the soft murmur of his voice when he made his mysterious phone calls, the country music that drifted from his radio late at night. She was falling for him. The realization hit her like a cold splash of water. This kind, mysterious man who fixed things and listened to her dreams and made her feel like she was the most important person in the world when he looked at her. She was falling for a drifter who might disappear tomorrow, and there wasn't a thing she could do to stop it. Outside her window, storm clouds were gathering again, and Elena pulled her blanket closer, wondering what tomorrow would bring to her quiet little corner of the world. October brought the first hints of winter to Cedar Falls, and with it came changes that made Elena's stomach twist with unease. It started small, things she might have missed if she wasn't already so tuned in to Cole's every mood and movement. The first sign was the cars. Expensive ones that didn't belong on the quiet streets of Cedar Falls. A sleek black sedan would cruise slowly past the diner, tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside. Elena noticed it because Mrs. Henderson called to complain about suspicious characters casing the neighborhood. The car came by 3 times that week, always around the same time Cole took his afternoon break. You expecting someone? Elena asked casually as she refilled his coffee cup, nodding toward the street where the sedan had just passed for the second time that day. Cole's hand tightened around his mug, and for just a moment his easy smile faltered. Not that I know of. Probably just someone lost. But Elena had seen the way his eyes tracked the car's movement, the tension that crept into his shoulders. That wasn't the look of a man puzzled by a lost driver. That was the look of someone who recognized trouble. The phone calls started getting stranger too. Cole's old flip phone, which rarely rang before, suddenly became a constant interruption. He'd excuse himself quickly, stepping outside or into the storage room, his voice dropping to urgent whispers. Elena tried not to eavesdrop, but the walls of the diner were thin, and sometimes phrases drifted back that made no sense for a drifter cowboy. The quarterly reports can wait another month, she heard him say one evening as she cleaned tables. I told you I'm not ready to make those decisions yet. Quarterly reports? Elena paused in her wiping, straining to hear more, but Cole had moved further away. When he came back inside, his jaw was tight and his green eyes looked troubled. Everything okay? She asked. Just family stuff. Nothing to worry about. But he spent the rest of the evening distracted, burning toast and dropping a coffee cup that shattered across the kitchen floor. The breaking point came on a Tuesday that started like any other. Elena was in the back office wrestling with the monthly bills when her phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to Mr. Peterson from First National Bank, and his words made her world tilt sideways. Miss Rodriguez, I'm calling about your father's outstanding loans. We've been patient given the circumstances of his passing, but we need to discuss a payment plan. Elena's hand went numb around the phone. What loans? Dad never mentioned any loans. 3 loans, actually. Equipment financing for the diner, a property improvement loan, and a personal line of credit. The total balance is $47,000, and we haven't received a payment in 8 months. The room spun around Elena. $47,000. Her father had always been careful with money, almost obsessively so. He'd taught her to pay cash for everything, to never spend what she didn't have. The idea that he'd hidden this much debt was impossible to believe. There has to be some mistake, she whispered. I'm afraid not. The loans are all in your father's name. But since you inherited the diner, the debt transfers to you. We'll need to see a payment of at least $5,000 within 30 days, or we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings. Elena somehow managed to end the call without falling apart completely. She sat staring at the stack of bills on her desk, the numbers blurring through tears she refused to let fall. $5,000 might as well have been $5 million. The diner barely broke even most months, and her savings had been wiped out by her father's medical bills. She was so lost in her panic that she didn't hear Cole come in until he spoke. Elena, you look like you've seen a ghost. She looked up to find him standing in the doorway, concern written across his weathered face. For a moment she considered lying, making up some excuse about a headache or bad news from a supplier, but the weight of keeping secrets felt heavier than she could bear. The bank just called, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My father had loans I didn't know about, $47,000 worth. If I can't come up with $5,000 in 30 days, they're going to take the diner. Cole's face went white. $47,000? Are you sure? I wish I wasn't. Elena laughed, but it came out harsh and bitter. Turns out my careful, responsible father was gambling with money we didn't have. The diner, this place that's been my whole life, might disappear because of debts I never knew existed. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was strange, almost careful. What if you could get the money? Would that solve everything? Cole, I barely make enough to keep the lights on. I can't just magically produce $5,000. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I've been thinking maybe I should just sell to that development company that's been sniffing around. Cut my losses before they get worse. No. The word came out sharp, almost angry. Cole stepped closer, his green eyes intense. You can't sell this place. It's your home, your dream. There has to be another way. Like what? Rob a bank? Cole didn't laugh at her weak joke. Instead, he pulled out his old flip phone and stared at it like it held answers. Let me make some calls. Maybe I know someone who could help. Cole, I appreciate it, but I doubt any of your friends have that kind of money lying around. Something flickered across his face at that, an expression she couldn't quite read. You might be surprised, just give me 24 hours before you make any decisions about selling, okay? Elena wanted to argue, to tell him that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, but something in his voice stopped her. Okay, 24 hours. That night, Cole's mysterious phone calls took on a new urgency. Elena could hear him pacing outside, his voice rising and falling in heated conversation. She caught fragments that made even less sense than before. I don't care about the board meeting. This is more important. Yes, I know what I'm asking. It's not about the money, it's about what's right. At one point, she heard him say something that made her freeze in the middle of washing dishes. Transfer whatever it takes from the discretionary fund. I'll deal with the paperwork later. Discretionary fund? What kind of drifter cowboy talked about discretionary funds? Elena found herself really looking at Cole for the first time in weeks, noticing details she'd been too comfortable to question. His boots were expensive, worn but well made. His watch, usually hidden under his sleeve, looked like it cost more than she made in a month. And there was something about the way he moved, the quiet confidence that spoke of a man used to being in charge. The next morning, Cole was different. Still kind, still helpful, but there was a nervous energy about him that she'd never seen before. He burned the first batch of pancakes, forgot to start the coffee, and jumped every time his phone rang. You sure you're okay? Elena asked, watching him pace behind the counter like a caged animal. Just waiting for some news, he said, but his smile was forced. Should know something soon? Around noon, a man in an expensive suit walked into the diner. He looked completely out of place among the farmers and truckers. His shoes too shiny and his haircut too perfect for Cedar Falls. Elena watched as his eyes scanned the room until they landed on Cole. Mr. Jackson, the man said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone used to boardrooms and business deals. We need to talk. Cole's face went pale, but he nodded. Elena, I need to step out for a few minutes. As they walked outside, Elena caught part of their conversation through the window. The suited man was talking quickly, gesturing with papers he'd pulled from a briefcase. She heard Cole say something about keeping it quiet and not yet, but the rest was lost to distance and the noise of afternoon traffic. When Cole came back inside an hour later, he looked like a man who'd aged 10 years. His hands shook slightly as he poured himself coffee, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like fear. Cole, what's going on? Who was that man? He set down his mug and looked at her with an expression so full of conflict and pain that it made her chest ache. Elena, there are things about me you don't know, things I should have told you weeks ago. What kind of things? Before he could answer, his phone rang again. This time he answered it right there in front of her, and his side of the conversation made Elena's world shift once more. Yes, the transfer went through. I don't care what it looks like to the lawyers, because some things are more important than business, that's why. Elena stared at him, pieces of a puzzle finally starting to come together. The expensive cars, the mysterious phone calls, the way he'd fixed the church roof with materials that appeared overnight. The man in the suit calling him Mr. Jackson. Cole, she said slowly, who are you really? Cole opened his mouth to answer Elena's question, but before he could speak, the bell above the diner door chimed again. Elena turned to see another expensive car pulling up outside, this time a silver Mercedes that probably cost more than her entire building. A man in his 60s stepped out wearing a suit that screamed money and authority. Oh no, Cole whispered, his face going completely white. Not yet. I'm not ready for this. The man who walked through the door commanded attention without trying. Everything about him spoke of wealth and power, from his perfectly styled gray hair to his Italian leather shoes. His eyes swept the small diner with barely concealed disdain before settling on Cole with obvious relief. Jackson, the man said, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone used to being obeyed. There you are. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? The lawyers have been going crazy. The board is threatening a revolt, and Mother is beside herself with worry. Elena's brain struggled to process what she was hearing. Jackson? This man was calling Cole by a different name entirely. Hello, Uncle Richard, Cole said quietly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I figured you'd find me eventually. Uncle Richard. Elena's heart started beating faster as more pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. She looked back and forth between the two men, seeing similarities now that she hadn't noticed before. The same strong jawline, the same confident posture even when Cole was trying to shrink into himself. Find you? Richard's laugh was sharp. Jackson, you disappeared for 5 years. 5 years. Do you know what that's done to the company? To the family? The company was fine without me, Cole, Jackson said, but his voice lacked conviction. Fine? We've been hemorrhaging contracts because clients don't trust a business when the owner vanishes into thin air. The Pemberton name used to mean something, Jackson. Your grandfather built an empire, and you've been letting it crumble while you play cowboy and... He gestured dismissively around the diner. Wherever this is, Pemberton. Elena's knees went weak and she grabbed the counter for support. Pemberton Industries. Even in tiny Cedar Falls, everyone knew that name. They owned ranches across 3 states, had mining operations, real estate developments, and more money than some small countries. And Cole, Jackson, was part of that family. Elena, Jackson said, turning toward her with desperation in his green eyes. Let me explain. But Elena couldn't speak. She was staring at this man she thought she knew. This gentle cowboy who'd fixed her freezer and listened to her dreams, and realizing she didn't know him at all. Jackson Pemberton. She'd heard stories about him over the years. The playboy heir who'd been engaged to some senator's daughter, who threw parties that made the society pages and dated supermodels. Richard said, following Jackson's gaze to Elena. I see. Another local girl charmed by the mysterious drifter act. His tone was polite but dismissive, like Elena was a waitress he was tolerating. Miss, I'm sorry if my nephew has caused any inconvenience. We'll compensate you for any damages, of course. She's not just some local girl, Jackson snapped, something fierce flashing in his eyes. This is Elena Rodriguez. She owns this place and she's important to me. Important enough to abandon your responsibilities for? Richard pulled out his phone and showed Jackson the screen. The Mitchell deal fell through yesterday. $40 million, Jackson. Gone because they don't trust a company whose CEO has been missing for half a decade. Elena found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. CEO? Jackson closed his eyes like he was in physical pain. Elena, yes. I'm the CEO of Pemberton Industries. Or I was before I left. Before I ran away from everything. You lied to me. The words slipped out before Elena could stop them. All this time you've been lying to me. Not about the important things, Jackson said quickly, stepping toward her. Not about how I feel about you or this place or what these past months have meant to me. How I feel about you. Elena's voice was rising, anger finally breaking through the shock. How can I believe anything you feel when you've been pretending to be someone else entirely? Richard was watching this exchange with growing impatience. Jackson, we don't have time for this. The board meeting is tomorrow, and if you're not there, they're going to vote you out permanently. Everything your grandfather built will be gone. Maybe that's for the best, Jackson said, but Elena could hear the uncertainty in his voice. You don't mean that. Richard's tone softened slightly. I know Victoria hurt you. What she did, running off with David the night before your wedding, it was unforgivable. But hiding away won't fix anything. Elena felt like she'd been slapped. You were engaged? Jackson's face crumpled. Yes, 3 years ago. I thought I loved her and I thought she loved me. But the night before our wedding, I found out she'd been seeing my business partner for months. They'd been planning to take over the company. Together after we married. She told everyone you'd become obsessed with money and power, Richard added. Said you'd forgotten how to be human. That all you cared about was the business and your image. She wasn't wrong, Jackson said quietly. I had become obsessed. I was working 18-hour days, making deals just to make more deals, surrounded by people who only wanted to be near me because of my name and my bank account. When Victoria left, when I realized how shallow my entire life had become, I just broke. Elena's anger was warring with sympathy and she hated herself for it. So you decided to come slum it with the simple country folk? Play pretend that you were just a regular guy? It wasn't like that. Jackson's voice was pleading. I came here by accident, Elena. I was driving with no destination, just trying to get away from everything, and that storm hit. When I walked into your diner that night, soaked and tired and completely lost, you looked at me like I was just a man who needed help. Not a Pemberton, not a CEO, just Cole who needed coffee and a dry place to sleep. But you kept lying, Elena said, tears finally spilling over. Week after week, month after month. You let me worry about money while you probably have millions in the bank. You watched me panic about losing the diner when you could have fixed everything with pocket change. I wanted to tell you, Jackson said desperately, especially when you got that call from the bank. But I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you'd look at me differently. You'd see dollar signs instead of just me. And you thought lying was better. Elena wiped her eyes angrily. You thought deceiving me for months was the way to build trust? Richard cleared his throat impatiently. Jackson, as touching as this is, we really do need to go. The helicopter is waiting and we have a long flight back to Denver. I'm not going, Jackson said, but he didn't sound entirely convinced. You have to, Richard pressed. If you don't show up tomorrow, they'll strip you of everything. The company, your inheritance, your grandfather's legacy. Is this really worth throwing away everything you've worked for? Elena saw Jackson's face change, saw the weight of family obligation and responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. This was who he really was. Not the gentle cowboy who'd been content to fix her freezer and paint her walls, but Jackson Pemberton, heir to an empire with duties and obligations she couldn't even imagine. I have to go, he said finally, not meeting Elena's eyes. There are thousands of people who depend on that company for their jobs. I can't just let it all fall apart because I'm scared. Of course you do, Elena said, her voice flat with resignation. That's who you really are, isn't it? Not Cole the handyman, but Jackson Pemberton, CEO. Elena, please try to understand. I understand perfectly. Elena turned away from him, focusing on wiping down a counter that was already spotless. You had your little vacation from reality, and now it's time to go back to your real life. Thanks for the adventure. It wasn't an adventure to me, Jackson said quietly. These past months with you have been the happiest I've ever been. Elena didn't answer. She couldn't trust herself to speak without breaking down completely. The car is running, Richard said gently. We really do need to leave. Elena heard Jackson's footsteps moving toward the door, then stopping. Elena, when this is all sorted out, when I figure out how to balance everything, can I come back? Can we talk about this properly? She finally looked at him, this man she'd fallen in love with, and saw a stranger in expensive clothes who belonged to a world she'd never fit into. I don't know, Jackson. I honestly don't know. After they left, Elena stood alone in her diner, surrounded by all the repairs Jackson had made, all the evidence of his months of lies. Outside, the silver Mercedes disappeared down the highway, taking with it the man she'd thought she knew and loved. 3 days passed without a word from Jackson, and Elena felt like she was living in a fog. The diner ran on autopilot. She served coffee, flipped pancakes, and smiled at customers while her heart felt like it had been ripped in half. Every time the door chimed, she looked up hoping to see his familiar green eyes, then hated herself for the disappointment when it was just another trucker or local farmer. The worst part was how everything reminded her of him. The perfectly working freezer hummed quietly in the corner, a constant reminder of his gentle hands fixing what was broken. The fresh paint on the window trim gleamed in the afternoon sun. Even the jukebox, which now played songs without skipping, seemed to mock her with its reliability. Her best friend Lucy finally cornered her on Friday evening after the last customer had left. Honey, you look like death warmed over, Lucy said, settling onto a stool at the counter. I know you're hurting, but you can't keep going like this. Elena mechanically wiped down the same spot on the counter for the 10th time. I'm fine. You're not fine. You've been fine for 3 days straight, and it's painful to watch. Lucy reached across and stilled Elena's hand. Talk to me. What really happened with Cole? His name isn't Cole, Elena said, finally looking up. It's Jackson. Jackson Pemberton. Lucy's eyes went wide. As in Pemberton Industries? The billionaire family? The very same. Elena's laugh came out bitter. Turns out the sweet, simple cowboy I fell in love with is actually one of the richest men in the state, and he lied to me about it for months. Oh, honey. Lucy's voice was soft with sympathy. That must have been such a shock. You know what the crazy part is? Elena said, tears finally starting to fall. I think I could have handled him being rich. I could have dealt with the money, the fancy cars, all of it. But the lying, Lucy. For months he looked me in the eye and lied about who he was. How do you build a relationship on that foundation? Lucy was quiet for a moment, then asked gently, Do you think he lied about loving you? Elena's breath caught. I don't know. How can I know what was real and what was just part of his act? Was it an act when he fixed Mrs. Chen's washing machine? When he spent 3 days on the church roof in the blazing sun? When he sat with old Pete for 2 hours listening to war stories? Lucy's voice was patient but firm. Elena, I saw that man look at you. Whatever else he lied about, his feelings for you were real. Before Elena could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed the bank, and her stomach dropped. In all the chaos with Jackson's revelation, she'd almost forgotten about her looming financial disaster. "Miss Rodriguez." Mr. Peterson's voice was apologetic but firm. "I'm calling about the payment we discussed. The 30-day deadline is Monday and we haven't received anything yet." Elena closed her eyes. "I know. I'm still working on it. I understand this is difficult, but we'll need something by close of business Monday, or we'll have to begin foreclosure proceedings. I'm sorry." After hanging up, Elena stared at the phone in her hands. $5,000. She might as well need $5 million. "What was that about?" Lucy asked. Elena explained about her father's hidden debts, watching Lucy's face grow more concerned with each detail. "So even if I could somehow forgive Jackson for lying to me, it doesn't matter. I'm going to lose the diner anyway. Have you thought about calling him? Maybe he could help. With his money?" Elena shook her head firmly. "Even if I could swallow my pride enough to ask, how would that look? The poor girl begging her rich ex-boyfriend for cash? No thank you." Lucy looked like she wanted to argue, but the conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Elena looked up to see Mrs. Henderson peering through the glass, and reluctantly let her in. "Elena, dear, I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Mrs. Henderson said, bustling inside with a determined look. "But I heard some troubling rumors about the bank and your diner." Elena sighed. In a town like Cedar Falls, bad news traveled faster than gossip. "It's true. I'm probably going to have to sell." "Well, that's just nonsense," Mrs. Henderson declared. "This diner has been the heart of our community for 30 years. We're not going to let some bank take it away." Before Elena could ask what she meant, more people started arriving. Reverend Thompson came in with his wife, followed by Pete Kowalski, the Chen family, and half a dozen other regulars. Soon the small diner was packed with neighbors, all talking at once. "We heard about your troubles," Reverend Thompson said, raising his voice above the chatter, "and we've been talking among ourselves. This community takes care of its own." Mrs. Chen stepped forward with an envelope. "I know it's not much, but we wanted to help." Inside was $200 in cash and checks. "The fire department took up a collection," Chief Rodriguez added, handing over another envelope. "And the ladies' auxiliary." One by one, her neighbors and customers pressed money into Elena's hands. 20s and 50s, sometimes just 5s and 10s, but given with such love that Elena started crying all over again. "This is incredibly generous," she managed through her tears. "But it's not enough. I need $5,000 by Monday. Then we'll figure out how to get the rest," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "Maybe we can organize a fundraiser or—" She was interrupted by the sound of a truck pulling up outside. Elena's heart jumped when she recognized the rumble of Jackson's old pickup. But when she looked out the window, she saw it was being driven by someone else entirely. Jackson himself climbed out of the passenger side, and Elena's breath caught. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was messed up, and there was something desperate in the way he approached the diner. The crowd inside fell silent as he pushed through the door, his eyes immediately finding Elena's. "I came as soon as I could," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know you probably don't want to see me, but I couldn't stay away." Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "What are you doing here, Jackson?" "Being the biggest fool in 3 states," he said, stepping closer. "Elena, I made a terrible mistake. Not falling in love with you. That was the smartest thing I've ever done. My mistake was thinking that my money was what would scare you away, when really it was the lying that hurt you." "You're right," Elena said quietly. "It was the lying." Jackson nodded, his green eyes never leaving hers. "I went back to Denver, sat in that boardroom with all those suits talking about quarterly earnings and market projections, and you know what I realized? I haven't been living for 5 years. I've been existing, going through the motions but not actually living, until I met you. Jackson, let me finish, please." He pulled something from his pocket, a thick envelope. "This is a cashier's check for $50,000. It's not charity, and it's not me trying to buy your forgiveness. It's an investment." Elena stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "What kind of investment?" "In you, in this place. In the woman who taught me that fixing a broken freezer could be more satisfying than closing $1 million deal." Jackson's voice was getting stronger, more confident. "I want to be your business partner, Elena. Silent partner, if that's what you prefer. I want to help you turn this place into the bed and breakfast you dreamed about." "You can't just throw money at this and make it okay," Elena said. But her voice lacked conviction. "You're right. Money can't fix what I broke between us. Jackson stepped closer and Elena could see the sincerity in his eyes. But maybe time can. Maybe if I show you every day that I'm not Jackson Pemberton, the CEO, when I'm with you. I'm just Cole. The guy who loves you more than he's ever loved anything in his life. Elena looked around at her neighbors, all watching this drama unfold in her diner. Mrs. Henderson was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, and even gruff old Pete was smiling. What about your company? Elena asked. Your responsibilities? I'm keeping the business, but I'm restructuring everything. Hiring people I trust to handle the day-to-day operations so I can spend half my time here, half in Denver. The board wasn't happy, but they agreed it was better than me disappearing entirely again. Elena's walls were crumbling, and she knew it. And what makes you think I can trust you after everything? Jackson reached for her hands, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take them. Because I'm done hiding who I am. All of who I am. Yes, I'm Jackson Pemberton, and I have more money than I know what to do with. But I'm also the guy who spent the happiest months of his life fixing your freezer and listening to your dreams. Both things are true, Elena, and if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life proving that the second part is what really matters. Elena looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception, any sign that this was just another performance. All she saw was love, raw and honest and real. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it as equals. I don't want to be some kept woman you visit when you're bored with corporate life. Partners, Jackson agreed immediately. In everything. Elena took a shaky breath, then smiled through her tears. Okay, let's try this again. Hi, I'm Elena Rodriguez. I own this diner. Jackson's face lit up with the first genuine smile she'd seen since his uncle walked through her door. Hi, Elena. I'm Jackson Pemberton, but my friends call me Cole, and I'm completely, hopelessly in love with you. As he leaned down to kiss her, the entire diner erupted in cheers and applause. Outside, the autumn sun was setting over Cedar Falls, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise, and Elena knew that sometimes the best love stories were the ones that started with a stranger walking in from the rain.